Morning and welcome to our latest in Leading Through People webinar, where today we're joined by Fergal O'Brien, Director of Lobbying and Influence at Ibec. Morning, Fergal, how are you?
Good morning, Colin. How are you keeping this morning?
Good. We're also going to be joined in a little while by Kevin Green, Strategic HR Advisor and author of Competitive People Strategies. Kevin is just logging in there at the moment, so we'll have him on in a few moments. So basically, a couple of things we're here today to discuss. One is our latest 2021 report, Employment Insights report. So effectively, we've been carrying out this report since 2009. Over 3,000 respondents, job seekers, and over 1,300 employers. And what we've been able to see really is how we sort of track sentiment in the labour market, both on the, I suppose, from a worker's perspective and also from an employer's perspective, and look at the differences and challenges and challenges on both of them. We're going to have a poll today as well. On your screens, you'll see just a poll down the bottom, and what we're asking is, when will Ireland return to full employment? And we've kept it really simple, so 21, 2022, 2023, or 2024. There's a chat bar on the right-hand side of your screen, so just feel free to put some questions in there for Fergal and Kevin, and we'll ask them. We'll run for just up till 9 o'clock, and welcome, Kevin.
Technology.
Morning,
I've had a cracker. Good morning, Fergal.
Good to see you.
Glad to see you.
So hopefully you're not like the English football team in the Euros, Kevin, or they don't sort of do the same as you, sort of last to the party, but I'm sure you. So basically, just going to kick off. So on what we say is the macro level. So yesterday, Fergal, the Irish government obviously issued their recovery plan. So obviously you would have been talking to them about this and trying to influence what that looked like. I suppose, one, can you give us a bit of an overview of what's in it, and two, what's your sort of feeling on the impact it will have?
Yeah, thanks, Colin, and good morning, everyone. So I think, Colin, we're very much moving into the good news season now in the context of the management of the pandemic. We're moving towards the end, obviously, but not there yet in terms of the public health measures and the impact that they're going to have on businesses, the economy, and the employment. But we're going to see a number of things from government over the next couple of months that would be very much, I suppose, probably expansionary in nature. This is going to be putting more money into the economy, and it's going to be helping the economy to heal after an incredibly difficult 15 months or so. So we saw the first installment of that yesterday, probably trying to do a number of things. One, we have money from Europe. So when you have money from Europe, we always need a plan. So you saw that coming through yesterday in terms of the Europe's recovery and resilience program, with that particular focus on the green and the digital agendas and on the retrofit, which is something I think we should talk about from a labour market perspective, because I think it's going to be quite a significant challenge for us, actually. Then we're also looking at putting people back to work, because we do have an incredibly significant labour market impact as a result of this crisis. Obviously, we have an unemployment rate that is over 20%, much lower, obviously, when we adjust for COVID, but that is the percentage of our labour force that we see out of work at the moment. We see government setting an incredibly ambitious target, when you think of it, of having 2.5 million people in work by 2024. And again, it's interesting in the context of your question there in the poll about full employment. I think we're going to see a really kind of turbocharged labour market. I think we're going to see so much disruption and so much flux in the labour market over the next couple of years, because we're trying to put a lot of people back into jobs that maybe they had previously. We're going to have loads of people, unfortunately, for whom their jobs are not going to return. I think in some of our sectors, we're going to see a reopening, and unfortunately, then we're going to see business failures, because one of the things that's been really interesting over the last year is that the examiners and the liquidators have had no work, right? So no companies have failed, essentially, in the last 15 months, because the government supports have kept businesses operating. But we are going to have zombie firms out there. And it's only when we pull up the shutters that we're really going to see what that labor market kind of looks like now. And then after such a period of an economy on ice, you're going to see a turbocharge of trends that were there anyway. You know, whether it's going to be the digitization, the disruption coming through, a whole range of things. They're just all going to come really, really quickly. They're going to come together, and it's just going to be a complete state of flux. Government's going to try and shape that. So yes, they're putting money into some of the investment agenda, but only a small amount of money, really. We're going to see a lot more in a renewal of our National Development Investment Plan next month. So there's a lot more stimulus to come. Some measures in terms of helping people to reskill and upskill, and lots of announcements in terms of labour market programs, in terms of retraining and upskilling programs. But at its core, Colin, it's, I suppose, a vote of confidence, ambition, and it is a plan for recovery. But it's the first of a number of plans in what's going to be a very, very busy landscape in terms of government trying to help the economy back on its feet, continuing to give those supports for businesses, but they start to wind down towards the end of the year. But that target of 2.5 million people is in work by 2024 is something we should keep a focus on. And you know, it's not that long ago when we only had a little over 1 million people at work, and then we hit 2 million. Now we're looking at a very ambitious target for 2.5 million people. So it's positive to look forward to.
Yeah, I think we've good history here in this. Like after the obviously great financial depression of 2009, you know, Richard Bruton was tasked with, obviously we had, you know, he had targeted an extra 100,000 people into jobs and ended up getting 200,000 people into jobs. And that's slightly sort of forgotten about how really great a job that happened over that period up to sort of 2017, 2018, etc. And we got back to normality. Kevin, just in the UK, obviously there's been stimulus there, and the government have put in, you know, economic incentives and changes and that. How, like, you're slightly ahead of us, obviously, in terms of the economic cycle. Really, you've reopened quicker. Our hotels actually opened up just today, but you're probably, I don't know, maybe 2 months ahead of us, I would think, or something roughly like that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose on the 17th of May, we sort of had quite a major reopening. So pubs, restaurants, eating inside. So, you know, we're waiting for the 21st of June, which is more or less, complete deliberalisation, major events, all of that sort of stuff, big weddings and things like that. So, yeah, I think we're ahead in terms of the health crisis. And so from an economic perspective, we're certainly slightly ahead. I mean, we saw a drop in unemployment. You know, how remarkable is that? You know, we haven't even reduced all the restrictions and we've got unemployment down to 4.7%. You know, so we're not that much higher than we were pre-COVID already. And that's as we start to see the jobs market. And I think what Fergal described as potentially happening in Ireland is happening here. So we are seeing huge disruption to the labour market. We're seeing employers struggling in all three sorts of parts of shortages. So we've got labour shortages. We've lost 750, 800,000 Europeans that have gone home that predominantly were operating at the front of the labour market. We've got skills shortages, which were there pre-COVID and have, you know, been exposed and have sort of amplified to an extent since we've started to hunt for skills and talent. And we've got talent shortages. Employers are saying they are struggling to find people that have not just got the skills, but are the talent to help their business grow. So, you know, we've got a huge amount of disruption. We've had a lot of people moving jobs. There is a lot of uncertainty. There is a lot of fluidity in the labour market. We can see that a lot of people are changing jobs much earlier than they would do post a normal recession. So we've got some sort of different behaviour here, which is really creating some turmoil. And from an employer's perspective, there's a number of issues I think that are really quite important. One is, how do I hang on to my talent? So there's a lot of organisations thinking about, how do I, you know, what my workforce have got used to is great flexibility. We've communicated more effectively. We've engaged them. We've worked differently during this. And actually, I think our workforce want us to continue that. You know, they certainly don't want to go back. So how do we really build that into normality? That's one thing about helping you retain your talent. The second thing is, how do we attract people? So I do think we will see some real pressure on pay in the foreseeable future. Within the next sort of 6 months, I think we'll see sort of hikes in pay to attract talent and skills to organisations. Now, the government is trying to play its role, and I think, like Fergal, we will see a growth in insolvencies and bankruptcies as we go through the rest of this year when the government funding sort of unwinds. But I still think the underlying trend in the labour market is going to be quite buoyant, and I think it's going to be quite tight from an employer's perspective. From a candidate's perspective, you're going to have choice. If you've got talent and you're in demand, you're a digital marketeer or a technologist or a data scientist, I think you can name your price. You can work with who you want to work. And I think you'll be empowered to negotiate and, whether you want to work at home 3 days of work or in the office or never go into the office or work remotely, and actually, I think that's one of the great things. It really has accelerated the sort of flexibility agenda for employers and candidates. And I think that's going to be really interesting as it plays out over the next couple of years.
I think, I suppose that's really interesting. So in the last, since COVID happened, really in our recruitment business, I suppose in FRS Recruitment, we've seen a dual sort of labour market happening. Huge demand still in technology, manufacturing, tech, and healthcare, obviously, and then what we would call sort of those office, to a certain degree, sort of shared services, office type roles slowing down considerably. Healthcare, retail and hospitality, obviously, in real bad shape. So it's been a challenging time, I think, for lots of organisations, with this sort of dual sort of thing going on. And we might delve a little bit deeper because I think we talked about it yesterday. We're starting to see different markets, from an employment perspective, opening up, and challenges. Remote work is great, etc., but it's offering different types of challenges. Just in terms of our report, so what we see in this report since 2009, we really take a sort of a temperature check on what workers are looking for, and that. And I suppose one of the key things we asked from the last recession, really in 2009, right the way through, was, if you lost your job today, how long before you actually regain another job? And back in 2009, right, 12 months was at sort of 60%. So people had this perception, God, if I lose my job, I'm going to be out of work for a long time. This time around in this year's report, we see that it's basically people think they're going to get back into job in 3 months. So they can sort of see, look, things are sort of really, really starting to open up. And the surveys across, as I said, across 3,000 people, across all sectors. So we see that positivity trend, I think there, that if I want a job, I can and will get a job, And I think what we see with those in employment, which is really important, as you said, Kevin, from a retention perspective, 48% of people who are in a job are looking for a new job. So, and that's probably double the norm of what we see. And I think it's quite, when you think about it, it's actually quite obvious why, because a lot of people have sat tight for the last sort of 16, 17 months and have sort of said to themselves, well, I'm not going to take the risk of moving somewhere new in the midst of all this turmoil that's going on. But I think what you will see over the next 6 months is a lot of people starting to look around, and employers really need to be considering and getting ahead of that in terms of retention. It's really, really critical that they look at, what have I got to do to sort of keep my best people, on board, and that goes right across really everything. And I think obviously employers are telling us, 90% of employers are going to hire someone in the next 6 months. Like 90% of employers that we sort of, like, there's 1,300 there. So that's obviously, again, as Fergal said, hugely positive. And we're sort of, I think we'll see, as Fergal sort of intimated there, you're going to see huge fluxes happening in the labour market quite quickly, So just in terms of that macro thing, Fergal, like, the World Economic Forum released something yesterday around how do we solve that sort of paradox of high unemployment and low availability of workers. And I think it's the key challenge, probably not for long term, but definitely, and we see that worldwide in the States, huge, what they see is huge unemployment, but a lack of available workers. And we obviously see, anecdotally in Ireland, we don't really have the stats on it yet, but that lots of employers in retail and hospitality are looking for people, but can't find them. So.
Yeah, Colin, we're going through, I suppose it's going to be a period of flux, but also experimentation. When we look at other countries that are ahead of us, we can see some of the trends that I think we're going to see in the Irish market. We're definitely seeing that from Kevin's insights there in the UK and also from the US and elsewhere. So one of the challenges, as you said there from the World Economic Forum report, is I think we could be looking at a higher level of kind of an unemployment rate for full employment. I think there is going to be withdrawal of labor for all sorts of reasons, because there's just so much change happening in society. There's so much resetting of what people want in terms of their family and kind of life objectives. So I think that is going to be a big challenge. A lot of people will be looking at what they would now regard as even more precarious occupations, sectors and roles, and they may be reluctant to go back to some of those. And I know we'll talk about it as well, just in terms of our blended world of work and remote working. There's certain occupations that won't facilitate that. And we're building a big divide in the labour market. And particularly where things are operative related or manual, very much physical on site, then I think for a lot of people, they're going to be reevaluating their kind of career prospects and their lifestyle out of those career choices. Yeah. And I think that's going to be a challenge for employers, and we're going to need to be able to position really, really good careers in all of those roles that will give great opportunity, great advancement opportunities, and a lot more investment in upskilling and learning. So I think there's just so much flux going to come. Employers are going to have to work quite hard, I think, to get people back into certain roles, particularly what would be regarded as precarious type roles.
Yeah, I'm not quite so sure about the precarious roles. I mean, I think one of the things that, even your research, Colin, shows that, if you were offered a year-long contract, would you consider leaving permanent employment? 66% said yes. Now, I'm sure if you'd have asked that question in previous years, people wouldn't have said that. Would you leave a permanent job for a contract? And 66, 2/3 of people said they would. So I think there's a changing attitude to work. I think people are much more interested in, is it a good job? Does it create meaning? Is it well paid? Does it fit with my lifestyle? And actually, I'm less worried about the contractual situation. I'm more interested in about whether I'm going to enjoy it, whether it fits with the rest of my life. So I think there's a changing shift. I think employers are going to struggle more with this idea that there's huge availability of people. I just think that there is. We've got a mindset of abundance in relation to the labour market. And I think employers are going to struggle hugely. I think they're going to have to be much more innovative, much more creative about trying to attract people and retain people to their organisation. So I think, some of the benefits that we used to give just to permanent employees will start being given to people on contracts that are working temporary or interims. I think we'll end up giving them benefits. I think we'll end up giving them, money for retraining. We're going to treat them much more importantly. It's nearly 1/3 of people in large organisations working some kind of non-permanent way. And I think employers are waking up to, that's a huge amount of skill and talent within my organisation, and I need to treat it differently. Just because I engage them on different contractual terms, I still need to think about how engaged they are they well managed, are they inspired, do they feel they belong, is there a role for them? So I think that's going to be one of the big shifts that we see, which is employers having to treat temporary workers or interims or contractors or freelancers differently. And I think those individuals are going to have a lot of choice. And so that's the other driver. It's called a labour market because it's a market. It's about supply and demand. And I think we're going to see changes on both sides of the equation, which is going to create lots of difficulty for employers that just want to do things the same way as they've always done them. I think that's the big challenge.
Yeah, I think it was interesting in that World Economic Forum, sort of those economists talking about, and it's how economists typically look at things. They're looking at a sort of macro level. Automation, you'll solve the problem. Well, you're not going to solve all the problems with that. Data driven, the economist in LinkedIn talking about, actually the hunt for talent is really fierce. Like, it's really difficult to find those that top talent. Well, she would sort of say that anyway, but but I think one of the things particularly in Ireland, is that inclusivity thing, and two different economists talk about this around migrant workers, one, and female employment. I think they're two critical areas for us in Ireland, right? So we're really good, during our sort of real boom years at attracting people into Ireland from, Eastern Europe particularly, and further afield, and it fueled our economy, but I suppose we're not as attractive now as a place to work, probably as we were back then. Our salaries here were significantly higher than then. And female participation in Ireland is I think it's 8 percentage points lower than the UK, and we just have this historical thing. And I think the pandemic is actually going to, what we will see is, a lot of female workers who have been forced back to work from home, are working from home essentially, and to a certain degree have enjoyed that sort of remote work sort of situation. And how do we sort of maintain that? So just on the migrant working thing, Fergal, how do you see that playing out? Because we are absolutely going to have to bring people in from abroad, aren't we? So
I think in terms of the labour supply pressures we're going to face, we're going to face it across the space. One of the areas I suppose that really concerns me, and I just touched on it there in the introduction, is around this ambition we have for our low carbon economy, because we need to put a lot of investment into the economy in the next 10 years, and an unprecedented amount of investment actually. A lot of it low carbon related. We see the announcement yesterday in terms of the retrofit programs, additional funding. We've 500,000 homes targeted for retrofit by 2030, and we want to do lots of other things in terms of building public transport and new roads and new schools and hospitals. But we have a housing crisis, and the housing crisis is such a material issue in the labour market, because unfortunately it means that our cost of living here is quite high. And housing, as you know, if you're already an incumbent, then you're generally not as impacted by it. It's the new entrant that really gets hit by where your rents are and housing market pressures. So we're going to have this incredible demand for labour, and I'm very concerned about the construction and related trades and everything we want to do on our low carbon agenda, while we're trying to ramp up significantly the number of homes we need to build every year. And you're going to have a housing market from a rent perspective and a cost of living that's going to mean it's not that an attractive place to be. So I think we got some big choices to make, and we're going to have to look at some serious trade-offs actually, because I don't think we're not going to be able to do all of those things. To attract the labour, you need the homes. We may have to say, actually, everyone wants to go green, right? We may have to say that in terms of our low carbon agenda, it won't be possible to reach those kind of really labor intensive retrofit and some of the green investments by 2030. We might have to figure out other ways of doing it around renewable energy, rather than fixing all our homes with workers, unfortunately, we might not have.
Kevin?
Well, I mean, I think let's do the female one. I mean, I think I'm really interested in that, because again, what we're seeing is, in terms of female employment in the UK, they have been more adversely affected from COVID, and certainly were the roles that were made redundant. Higher exposure to part-time work, higher exposure to precarious forms of employment, working in hospitality and retail. So more affected by the COVID pandemic. But one of the things that's clear is we are going to need higher female participation in the labour market. And I think what this means again for employers is we're going to have to think about engaging people in a range of different ways. So we are going to have to think about different days, different times, different starting times, because flexibility is that much more important to females for a whole host of reasons. I think become men, but I think women particularly, if you create flexible employment. Just to give you an example, in the UK, only 22% of the jobs that are advertised in the UK last year mentioned flexible work. Now, I think that will be 50% this year, but I think over the next 2 years, it will be 80 or 90%. Saying, look, we're looking for talent, we're looking for people that want to do this job, and we're prepared to bend, we're prepared to think about different rotas, different shift patterns. We're happy to, might only be term time working, might be a whole host of things. So I think employers have got a huge opportunity, but to embrace that opportunity, to bring people in, female workers into the labour market and then retain them, we're going to have to be creative. We're going to have to, design work patterns that are very, very different. And I think that works for employers, and I think it works for women, because I think that's hugely important, because once people are participating in the labour market, they're much more than likely to think about retraining, reskilling, progression, trying to earn more money over time. So I think it's a real positive contribution to economic growth over the long term. So I think that's one. I think the second one, I think that's most probably hugely important, is because you are members of the EU still, so as we aren't, so you will have access. We are doing, our government is going completely the wrong way. If you look at a labour market that was tight before, we've then lost 800,000 Europeans, and we're going to constrain immigration, through not having flexibility of labour or being able to hire from Europe. So we've got a tight labour market, which is going to be exacerbated by our immigration policies. So, we're shooting ourselves in the foot in relation to that. So I think all the best to Ireland. I think what you've got to do is, recognise that people that say, I don't know, construction workers from Poland or Lithuania have got choice about where they work. What you need to do is to make Ireland as attractive a proposition as possible. And I think Fergal's absolutely right. Housing, apart from pay, housing is the other key factor. So you're going to need to think about, if we do need to bring in this labour, how do we house it, and how do we make it an attractive proposition for them to be here for the next 2 or 3 years?
Very good. So really, just delving into our report, right? So I suppose we really, what comes across in this report this year, obviously versus last year, is that sort of confidence we see with workers. So when we look at pay, last year when we asked people would they receive a pay rise in the next few months or next year, in their upcoming year, only 50% said they would. This year it's upwards of 75%. So obviously there's this, as you mentioned, Kevin, there's this sort of pressure on pay, right? So how do employers tread that sort of line between, hiring great talent and great people and affordability?
Well, I think it's a classic. It's a classic trade-off for employers, isn't it? One is what's the cost of not having the skills and the labour? That's the point. How do you deliver your service to your customers if you have a shortage of people? So, I think that's a starting point. The first thing is, how do I attract people to my organisation? You've got to have to be better at looking at pay. What is going on within my sector? How are people paying? So, both a sector point of view and a local point of view, because there are different labour markets, and that comes out from your research as well, Colin. There are different local labour markets within Ireland which seem to be behaving quite differently. So one of the things is you've got to really understand what's going on locally and what's going on within your sector or the skills that you're looking for. So I think what you need to do is to make sure that you are paying a decent wage. And I think you then compete around cost stuff. So again, the idea that we can employ people on different work regimes, rosters or schedules. People might want to work 2 days a week or 3 days a week. Maybe I want to engage people on an annualized hours contract. So we may want to employ people on different things, and that makes your jobs more attractive. So I think that one of the things employers are going to have to recognize is you don't have to just compete with pay. It may be other things. It could be, health insurance or another range of benefits that you can give. But flexibility, I think, is one of the ones that's going to be very high on candidates' agenda, because they've got used to it and they're interested in seeing, and they do want to blend work with the rest of their lives. So I think you've got to think about what's the cost of not having the skills and labour in your organisation, thinking about what other employers are doing, making sure you're not out of touch with the market, both locally and sectorally. And then I think you've got to find a way of making yourself more attractive. And don't forget, if you look at how people make choices, and I think you pick up on your research, the type of culture, the type of organisation, will I get development? Will I be engaged? Will it be interesting work? Will I be treated well? Is really, really important. So I think employers are going to have to compete for labour, both to bring it into their organisation and to retain it, on being a great employer.
I think, Colin, for a lot of employers, this is going to be a really, really tricky issue, because what I think is going to happen from an economic perspective, I think demand is going to come back so strongly, right? So I think organizations are going to be really busy, but will they be profitable? I think that's the real pressure that we're going to face in the next year at least, and probably beyond. And there's a couple of strands to this. So one, we're looking at obviously at a potential phenomenon of quite significant inflation coming back, right? And that's obviously going to be impacting in terms of labor demand and wage pressures. But from a business viability and a business margin perspective, I think we could see a lot of organizations that are really busy. They're out the door in terms of demand. I think we're going to see a lot of supply disruptions, right? So business is going to be messy, right? And it's going to be volatile. Production processes are going to be interrupted. We're going to see all of that. But there is going to be a higher cost of business, whether you're in frontline services, hospitality, whatever it is. There's going to be COVID related. There's going to be input related. Margins are going to be tighter, right? A whole range of costs are going up, and we're going to get these labor cost pressures as well. So it's going to be a good macro climate, great demand, but for some organizations, they're going to struggle to get the margins, and that's going to be their challenge. And for some, labor costs will be a key determinant of that margin. For other organizations, it's going to be a lesser determinant. So I think Kevin's absolutely right in terms of what can be done around non-labor cost attractiveness. And again, we've shown disruption and flexibility, and everything has been able to be delivered in the last 12-15 months, and employees will keep coming back to that with their employers in terms of their bargaining power around flexibility and around different ways of working and different arrangements for work. And for a lot of employers, particularly those who maybe can't afford to go as high on some of the labor rates because they simply don't have the margin, that's where they're going to have to give a lot more. And some of that, the rule book before the crisis will have to go out the window.
Yeah, I think from an attraction perspective, it's really interesting when you look at the sort of trends in this report over what's now near 11 or 12 years, and initially, salary was up here, and the job itself is obviously the key thing. People want a job that, I suppose, gives them purpose really and engages them. But I suppose there's two big moves really in our survey over that sort of period. One is around commuting and distance, how far you're willing to travel, right? And consistently year on year, that is dropping. People are willing to travel less. And I think obviously we'll come on to remote working a little bit, but even pre-COVID, we were starting to see that. We would ask how far are you willing to travel? Less than 10% were willing to travel over an hour. The mean sort of number was 30 minutes, 45 minutes. That's the sort of where people really, the sort of max they want to travel. The second thing was around what we call in the industry employer brands, right? So what your employer brand looks like. Back in 2009, that was not on the radar. People sort of went, and took a job. They might have took an interest in who the employer brand and what they did, what they stood for, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what we're seeing is, particularly with younger workers, are very tuned into, sustainability of an organization, how they treat people, their sort of CSR profile, what they stand for. They want to hear that straight out. And organizations have been quite poor at that. They've mixed up this thing of having foosball tables and sort of snooker tables and, fridges with beer in it with employer brand. It actually is the opposite. And I think people see through that really, really quickly. So, the vision and values and purpose of an organization is critical. And I think employers are starting, particularly large employers and multinationals, are starting to spend a lot of money on this sort of stuff. And for medium-sized, small businesses, etc., competing in that market is quite difficult. But actually, small and medium employers, I think, really can step up to the plate in that area. In terms of, it's very easy for them to get there much more quickly. In a large organization, as Kevin, and Fergal, it takes a long time to sort of figure this sort of stuff out. But if you got 30 or 40 people, you can get there much quicker. And I think it's a really key thing that comes through from this report is employers, from an employer brand, and what they stand for really needs to come through. So.
Go on, Fergal, you go.
Yeah, I was going to say for a lot of SMEs, their purpose is actually really clear, right? That's the reason that maybe entrepreneurs started that business, right? But they don't probably think about the importance of purpose. They probably don't communicate it on an ongoing basis. They don't engage their employees as much in their purpose as maybe they could do, right? So I think the employee engagement around purpose and the continuous communication on that, I think, will be more important than ever. We're now coming to a stage, and you kind of mentioned CSR, right? The environmental, the green agenda was on that list, right? And we did a few things as organizations to have some green credentials. We are just moving into a whole different space. I think the low carbon transition is potentially the single biggest issue for employers and business over the next decade. The scale of the targets and the pace that we're going to have to achieve this change and this disruption between now and 2030 and out to 2050 is phenomenal. And I think even so much has happened in the last year and a half, but because of COVID, we probably haven't debated enough or got our heads around it. This is coming in a real big way now, not just to how organizations present themselves, but actually how their business model functions. This is going to the core as to how organizations operate, and their employees want to engage on that. They want to be part of that conversation. And it's core to purpose, but it's also core in terms of how employees will engage with that business, and even things like commuting and the sustainability around commuting. But for the first time ever, I think the low carbon and the green agenda is now essential to business operations. It's not just an organizational kind of brand or communication. It's actually how you run your business model. And that's going to be a big, big change.
I think, just picking up on a couple of things there, I think one of the things that's really interesting is what you talked about in terms of commuting and aspirations of workers, Colin. I mean, that's really quite an interesting thing that, what people find acceptable is being reduced. And I suppose as we go into the whole decarbonisation agenda, we're not going to want to move people around as much because that pollutes. So you've got two things which are going to be in line. And the government, I suppose, have been sort of I certainly here have been a little bit reticent about supporting remote working or people working at home, because I think they're worried about city centres and the economic impact. But in the long term, clearly one of the things we see is if less people are moving, then we're creating less pollution, because they can deliver the same productivity or output without having to travel for an hour every day 2 ways. So I think there's a coalition around some stuff that employees aspire to and what businesses are going to need to think about in terms of decarbonisation. And then if you overlay digitalisation onto that, which is how much we can do from home by Zoom calls and all the other sort of mechanisms that we're now using, I think there is a huge opportunity for businesses to grasp something that's been foisted on them and see it as part of their sustainable approach to decarbonisation. So I think there's a lot of things that are coalescing which are helping accelerate what we've been talking about, Fergal, which I think is businesses having to think about this differently. I think in terms of the employer branding piece, Colin, I think what we've found is that large organisations have found it much more difficult, certainly in the lead up to COVID over the last 3 or 4 years, to attract the talent that they need. And what we have found is the growth of small businesses and startups and entrepreneurial businesses has been a driver of where we find talent wants to work. Why do people want to work in a small organisation? My voice is listened to. I'm fully engaged in it. I'm part of it. I'm not just a cog in a wheel. I'm not part of a hierarchy. So large organizations are starting to try and think about how do they replicate, that in terms of structure, culture, ethos. And that's a huge challenge for large organizations. So I'm with you. I think large organizations are going to have to think about employer branding, not so much from the job page and the adverts and all of that, but much more about the experience of employees. Because you can see, even from your study, that people that are job candidates really look at an organization and do searches on social media and really look at what people are saying and go to Glassdoor because they're really interested in it, and they don't want to take the superficial marketing spin. They want to understand what it's really like to work there. So yes. I think it's got to be real, and that means making sure that your culture really is inclusive, and that creates a huge amount of internal change as well as the sort of decarbonisation and digitalised agenda that we talked about.
Yeah, it's something we looked at a couple of years ago and started looking at, like, is that triple bottom line sort of thing, you know, financial, social and environmental, you know, and, you know, it doesn't happen unless you really measure it, you know what I mean? Obviously, as a cooperative and a social enterprise, you know, FRS has really tapped into that, you know, obviously we're, you know, financially and performance driven, but the environmental thing is a bigger challenge, you know, and we're probably only really getting there, you know. So I suppose probably the hottest topic in the last 14 or 15 months from an employment perspective has been remote work, you know, and I call it the remote work experiment, really, you know, that we've had for, you know, 14 or 15 months. I think the two of you guys are sort of, you know, at home today and have been working quite a lot from home. I'm lucky enough to live sort of 8 minutes from the office, so it's easy to get in here, and that's so. And like I suppose in FRS and across all of our business, mobilized, you know, hundreds of people. I think there were 650 people from an office base to a remote base, like in about 4 days or 5 days. But it's obviously, you know, offered challenges and that. So just definitely what we're seeing is, right, so and I'll come on to the international challenge around this, because I think it's something that hasn't really been sort of thought of yet. It's all, you will get everyone to work remotely and, you know, that type of thing, but there's an opportunity and a challenge around the international bit. We'll come on to that in a minute. But employers, like in our report, there's an increase there from 61% to 83% of employers that will offer, you know, more remote working jobs, you know, and do we think, I suppose, first of all, that at what level this is going to continue, you know? So as we sort of particularly as the economy reopens and organizations come back, you know, at what level do we think, you know, remote work will sort of land on a sort of an ongoing basis?
I have no idea, Colin. I don't think any of us know. I think the experimentation is the key, isn't it, Kevin? Right? So we're going into the lab on this, right? We're going to experiment for a year, and that's what most organizations. Because look, again, in Ibec, we're doing all of this research, and I know lots of people are looking at it, right? So we're definitely going to see a significant increase in terms of blended work, no doubt about it. But I don't think we know yet. I think we'll know a lot more in 6 and 12 months. We'll need to keep it under constant review. I think so many of us as organizations, we're not certain what kind of service our customers are going to want, and how they're going to want to engage, and how patterns are going to change, and how ways of doing business are going to change. So yes, and this morning we've been talking about all of the employee attraction, retention issues. But there's also business model needs, and there's going to be organizational demands in terms of meeting the needs and preferences of all our customers. And that's all going to have to find its form. So we definitely set off an experiment. And again, our research would be the same as yours. Vast majority of companies are going to offer fairly significant blended and more flexible ways of working. But it's an experiment. And I don't think we know how this is going to look in 1 or 2 or 3 years' time.
Yeah, I think Fergal's right. I mean, I think the experiment has created, you know, a learning experience. So people have tried different things, both individual workers and businesses and organizations. And I think there is stuff that you can see is going to stick already. there is clearly a lot of people going, well, all of that stuff about you can't work from home is just gone. It's just a nonsense. It's been proven that for, I don't know, 70% of sort of knowledge workers, you can work remotely and do your job pretty effectively. So I don't think organizations can hold back that tide. I think that sort of journey's gone. So I think what businesses have got to do is to really think about how do we deliver. So I think Fergal's right. So what's our business model? When do we need people to provide services physically to customers, and when can they do their activity remotely? So I think there's the first thing is about thinking about your organizational design, thinking about how you deliver your services to customers, how you use technology and digital platforms to deliver is one driver. And in that, I think you'll see that there will be a move towards more digitalization. So I think there's a shift happening at that level. And then the second one, I think, is more to do with the individuals. And this is to do with talent. So if I know I need data scientists, I need researchers, I need recruiters, I need lots of really good, talented people. And I know that they are interested in flexible work. So the second drive, so I think one's about business model. The second one is then about how do I attract and retain and fully utilize. Because I think the bit I'm really looking for in the data, Fergal, is the stuff about productivity. Because the debate is out, because everyone said productivity went up, and then we had Zoom fatigue, and everyone's going, it's gone down. I'm going, well, show me some data, show me some evidence. Mm-hmm. I'm really interested in that, because I do think if you take out the time that people commute and they are at work, that you might find that productivity goes up. So then there's going to be more of an economic argument for remote working and choice being driven by the people that have got the skills and the capabilities. Yeah. So I think it is going to be a state of flux. It is going to be about business model design and optimization and delivering what customer wants. And then really thinking about, how do I get the most from my people? What do they want? One of the things I keep saying to employees is, for God's sake, don't think you know the answer. Engage your staff, ask them. Because the other thing is clear is, if you ask 10 people, everyone wants to do something different. There is, and you're going to have to then say, well, a lot of people want to work in some way flexibly, but some people want to work 4 days in the office, 1 at home. Some want to work 3 days at home and 2 in, everyone's going to want different things. And I think also that flexibility isn't just about where you do the job, which is the remote working. I think the debate is already moving on to hours, contract. One of the things in the business I'm a non-exec of is, 9 to 5 operation, call center driven. We then went remote working. We deployed technology, chatbots and things we wouldn't have used before. We deployed them at pace. We're now offering a service to customers, which is 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and Saturdays. And that was driven partly by the technology and providing a greater service to customers, but partly staff saying, I don't mind starting at 11 in the morning and finishing at 8 in the evening. And actually, I'd rather work Saturdays than Tuesdays. Fantastic. So better choice for customer, in terms of hours of availability and business, better use of technology and optimizing performance, and greater work-life balance for the people that want to work flexibly. So there's lots of things at play. And I think Fergal's right. We're not going to know for another 6 months, 9 months, perhaps a year, how it plays out. Also, I would say is, you've really got to think about your business model and how you deliver service, and that thing about optimization of your human capital.
I think, Colin and Kevin, the productivity is going to be really interesting, right? And again, far too early, I think, to measure any of this, because we can probably do the transactional stuff better and more efficiently for all sorts of reasons. Long-term productivity and competitiveness in an organization, you really worry about the loss of the collaboration, the innovation, the new ideas, the starting the new projects, and all of those things that we know we need to be physically in proximity and together to really kind of spark the innovation in our organizations and to really get that kind of rich collaboration going. So again, I think it's going to take us a while before we know the answer on productivity, because we know we can do some things better remotely, and we lose a lot in terms of particularly the innovation, collaboration, ingenuity challenges for any business. So yeah, this got a while to run before we know the answers, I suppose.
In terms of, I suppose, but just quickly on the office market, we'll say, in Dublin and London. Fergal, what do we think is going to happen in sort of in Dublin in the coming months? Is there any sort of feedback there on what's happening?
Well, we're definitely not going to see wide-scale abandonment of the cities, is my view, Colin. We're going to see an awful lot of repurposing. You know, like every organization is telling us that they want staff, almost every organization is it, they want staff in the office for a certain amount of time. So we are going to a blended model. So we need a physical infrastructure. They'll probably say I don't need the same capacity for desks and seats that I had, but I need a different type of capacity, right? I need better collaboration space. I need better networking space. So we're going to see this big repurposing of offices, and we're not going to see abandonment, and we're still going to have offices to go to. But I think it will bring a bit of flux and a bit of softness in some of the market, but not an abandonment and a lot of investment in repurposing.
Well, we see
I think there will be. I think there's going to be. I think repurposing definitely. We're seeing many more people looking at hub space, but they require a lot less capacity. So there is going to be availability of office space in London. Certainly, there is talk about changing planning rules and looking at doing some stuff around housing, because clearly we've got problems with housing as well. So that would be no bad thing, you know. So locate people closer to where the work is, a good site, and then we're saving on people commuting again. So we get a double win. You know, you get that double win that people are looking for. So I think that, you know, I think you know, office redesigners are going to be in demand, is what I think. I think that when people do return to work, and if they go in 1 day a week and I want to come back to one little thing that I'm just seeing in the real talent market. So I'm working with a recruiter at the moment who's doing some really top-notch stuff with people in sort of the technology field, but in fintech and those type of organizations. And they have gone for a much more global search for talent, because they are saying, look, actually, if I need somebody to come in and network and collaborate and work face-to-face for a couple of days a month, then I can employ people across Europe, really, as long as they're in the same time zone. They can be, it doesn't matter if they're in Madrid or Munich or whatever. So there is some real interesting, you know, changes about where people are located. Because if you are going to bring your team together for a couple of days a month, then actually they can work in, you know, they can work at 5,000 miles away and still do that effectively. Now, that's only quite a small part of the labour market, but it seems to have grown very, very quickly, because I think what people can see is they can tap into labour markets that they couldn't. So if there's really talented data science in Eastern Europe, but they want to come to the UK or to Ireland, then why don't we employ them where they live and just bring them over now and again for a visit and work with a team and stuff? So there is going to be some really funky opportunity. So I think office space is going to be used differently. And I think there's a huge opportunity to think about, you know, international hires, particularly for SMEs that wouldn't have even thought about that before.
Yeah, for sure. I never thought I'd hear funky and Kevin Green in the same sentence, but sure, look, that's the first time for everything. Just in terms of the remote work, I suppose this sort of paradox around, you know, labour markets as part of the survey, like, and I did a radio interview on Kilkenny Carlow Radio the other day, and so we've two counties right beside each other with totally different sort of outlooks, you know, and they're only about, you know, from Carlow to Kilkenny is about a half an hour's, well, maybe 30 minutes drive. And I think it really summed up what's going on in the labour market. So you've got Carlow, which is quite a commuter-based town. You know, a lot more people doing remote work with a much more positive sort of outlook from the workers on what's happening around them, you know. And we, you know, job security was much better in Carlow. You know, they felt, you know, they'll retain their jobs. You know, 84% of people in Carlow believe they would secure a new job in 3 months, you know, versus, you know, in the 60s for Kilkenny. You know, would you consider a pay cut if your job is at risk? 68% said they would in Kilkenny. Carlow people definitely don't want to take a pay cut, only 38%. And that went on and on and on. And so there's this, so Kilkenny is very much a sort of a hospitality, manufacturing and traditional sort of, you know, labour market, whereas Carlow is this sort of much more commuter type town. So are we seeing a sort of a divide in the labour market from that perspective? And how does a region like Carlow compete then with somewhere like our region like Kilkenny, which is much more traditional, compete for labour? And as you know, and if you take it down to the industry level, in a few years, are we going to see that? You know, how do those sort of employers in a place like Kilkenny, and I presume similar places all over the country, there is for sure, and then in the UK, how are they going to, in the longer term, compete for those workers? Because I think it's going to become a big thing, Fergal, in the coming years.
Yeah, I suppose briefly on this one, Colin, I think again we're going into this phase of disruption, and lots of employers are now telling us that previously, if they were in a kind of a local kind of labour market catchment, you know, a lot of employees didn't really want to take on that long commute, right? So they were more likely to have higher retention rates. And one of the impacts that we're seeing from remote working now and more flexible working arrangements are that people are broadening the labour catchment. So it benefits the employers. Okay, they might, as Kevin said, they can attract employees from elsewhere, but the employees have more market power as well. They can go elsewhere. Whereas previously they wouldn't go outside, or a lot of people wouldn't want to go outside a kind of fairly defined, you know, sustainable kind of commuting length. So that's changing. So the market is being disrupted. I think that's probably the key takeaway that we're seeing, Colin.
I think you know, we talked a bit about commuting. I think one of the things we've seen that, around London is a huge growth in house prices outside of London. So what people are now recognizing is they are going to be working in a hybrid way, and they may be going to the office 2 days a week or 3 days a week, and they're prepared to trade off on those days a longer commute. So what's interesting is you can do your job from further afield. So you may commute further, but you might only do it 2 days a week rather than 5 days a week. And so people are trading off. And actually, where would I rather live, in the city or have a bigger garden and come out? So again, what we're going to see is the catchment areas, strangely for the talent in our organizations, most probably, and the affluent. So, I mean, one of the big problems, I mean, I've got to say this because I get passionate about this, is we are going to end up with a much more inequality. There is absolutely no doubt we're going to end up with a two-tier labour market in most developed economies, where we have the talent agenda driven by people that have got choice. You know, I can get a job, I can work flexibly, I can do it from more or less anywhere. I'm in sort of control of my own career. People want me, I can choose where and how I work. Fantastic for them, and employers are going to have to work really hard to retain those people. Then you've got a different part of the labour market where people haven't got as much choice. You know, I think there are going to still be labour shortages, but I do think it's still about a physical job. It's being in a retail shop, it's doing a customer service job, it's working in manufacturing, it's working in agriculture. These jobs can't be done remotely, and you have to do. And I think what we are going to find is those type of work is the work that gets automated more and more. So I think what we're going to end up is the more inequality in our labour market, more of a two-tier system. Now, the issue for me is government's response to this and employers' response has got to be a massive investment. Massive. I don't mean like the little bit we've seen from our government in the last couple of weeks. You know, a massive investment in reskilling and upskilling. You know, we know that we aren't preparing young people for the world of work as it is today, let alone tomorrow, next month, and the year after. So we have got to start to think about giving people the skills that are going to be required to make them viable in the job markets that we're going to create in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And that's going to require both business and government to really radically invest in skills like they've never done before, because I think you've got so much at play. And what you really don't want is huge inequalities within your labour market, because that, you know, if I'm doing a gig job, I'm going to end up working for Deliveroo for 40 or 50 years. You know, I'm going to be a bit dissatisfied with my life. I'm much more likely to turn inwards, to, you know, look for people to blame, to find political parties that are. So we have got to find a way through that big macro question.
And I think what we're going to see is the whole social model actually completely up for review. I think the issue of safety net for people, and it's not about precarious roles, it's about precarious sectors. And I think it's going to be really interesting. Kevin says, after coming out of this crisis, and we spoke about essential workers and the role of essential workers all the way through the crisis, but when we come out of it, who's got the better market power? The non-essential workers, so to speak. That model is not going to be sustainable. So I think government is going to look at the social model, safety nets around income and around all of the other social protections. And it's going to be a big area of debate. But as employers, that's going to have to be paid for. That doesn't get paid for on its own. That is going to have to be paid for, and this is a big discussion and debate that's going to have to happen. I think, and it's going to be a global debate that's going to happen over the next while.
I think one of the things we saw yesterday was this pilot of a universal basic income scheme for artists and creatives, which will kick off in January. I see Kevin grimacing, but I'm a big fan of it. I do think it's something that needs to be tested, and we need to look at how that sort of operates. In terms of our poll, I think people are looking at 2022 as the economy, returning to full employment. I doubt it'll be 2022. It'll probably be 2023. I think just huge thank you, Fergal, for coming along there. Obviously a busy day for you guys responding to all the government stuff. So really appreciate you coming on. Your insights, are really valuable. Great to talk again, Kevin, and we'll, I suppose, over the next couple of weeks, be taking snippets from the report and getting them out there. There's really, look, I think, huge thanks to our team, Erin Whittle, Sinead Killian, on pulling it together. I think it is the most in-depth sort of employment report in terms of, what workers think and employers think that's out there. And, we're seeing trends, and it's great that, look, we're seeing positivity. I think there's huge sort of challenges ahead, but and everything is sort of dependent on our vaccination rollout and no new sort of crazy variants coming along. So look, thanks to you both for coming along, and we'll catch up again soon. So thanks a million.
Thanks everyone. Bye bye.
Cheers, Colin. Cheers.
Thanks. Cheers.